Good evening and welcome to Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. I am Star Smart. Let's begin. The atmosphere across the Federal Republic of Ambazonia remains tense, defiant, and heavy with the weight of unresolved conflict. In cities like Bamenda, Boya, and Kumbo, the struggle for self-determination continues to shape daily life. Its scars etched in the silence of ghost towns, the echoes of gunfire, and the ever-present shadow of military patrols. 8 years into a war declared not by the oppressed, but by the oppressor, the Amazonian people remain caught in the crossfires of a brutal and protracted conflict. What began as peaceful calls for justice, dignity, and the restoration of the southern Cameroons has been met with repression, killings, mass arrest, and occupation. Yet in the face of relentless crackdowns, the spirit of the resistance has not been broken. It has only been evolving. Now, from the silent streets of Monday shutdowns to the loud defiance of community mobilization, Amazonia stands as both a battlefield and a birthplace of resilience. The struggle is no longer just about territory. It is about identity, survival, and the inalienable right of a people to choose their own destiny. Well, as reports continue to emerge of arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings, and military aggression masked as security operations, today's headlines offer a deeper look into the realities shaping the ground, the bloodshed behind the ghost towns, the hypocrisy within colonial rhetoric, and the quiet determination of a people who refuse to be erased. Well, this is not just a fight for freedom. It is a cry for recognition in a world too often silent in the face of African resistance. And as the world watches, Amazonia endures, unheard by many, but unseen by none. Let's get the prime headlines usher us into the full briefings of Undaunted. And these are the prime headlines on Undaunted tonight. Another arbitrary killing of Amazonians by colonial forces. Blood on a Monday. Why Bamenda still observes the ghost town. La Republic minister slams colonial government over Bamenda's abandoned state as roads raised concern. Another hypocritical case. Well, Guinea's climate of the year is what we see in the African news a year on, and forced disappearances continue to silence dissent. And on the foreign scene, Russia's dismissed transport minister found dead amid corruption probes. Well, let's get the details of this news in full briefings. In Bamenda, Ambazonia, Monday, July 7th, 2025, it unfolded with terror and resistance in the heart of Bamenda as the city was once again thrust into chaos during the weekly Monday ghost town. Now, what should have been a day of solemn civil disobedience turned violent as colonial forces reportedly opened fire in multiple neighborhoods while enforcing movement restrictions. Now, gunshots rang out in Mile 2, Mile 3, Nkwane, and Mile 6, scattering families, shattering shops, and bringing fear back into the heart of civilians who are already burdened by years of war. The city was gripped by uncertainty as military trucks patrolled the streets, though official casualty reports remain unclear, but residents fear that lives may have been lost. Now, the violence, while horrifying, is not new, but a grim reminder of the high price Amazonians have paid for this struggle of liberation, a struggle that the Ghost Town on Monday symbolizes in both memory and protest. The Monday Ghost Town, observed across many parts of Amazonia since 2017, is not just a passive shutdown of economic and social activity. It is an act of resistance, a collective withdrawal from the colonial system. Instituted to honor the dozens of peaceful protesters and civilians killed or arrested by the forces of La République du Cameroun during early demonstrations. The Ghost Town is a weekly act of remembrance and rebellion. It is a statement that while Amazonians may be unarmed, they are not powerless, that silence can be louder than gunfire, that empty streets and locked doors can carry more defiance than placards or speeches. But in recent months, efforts to enforce or suppress the observance have grown more aggressive. Armed units of La République's military frequently storm towns and cities on Mondays to force markets open or penalize businesses that comply with the Monday Ghost Town. Civilians are caught in the crossfire between enforcement and resistance, sometimes paying with their lives. Now, for many Amazonians, staying indoors on Monday is more than just obeying a directive from the resistance. It is about reclaiming dignity in a nation that has seen too much humiliation. Every closed shop is a refusal to feed the colonial economy. Every silent street is a reminder of the silenced voices of those massacred in different parts of Amazonia. Shot in Boya, massacred in Undu, disappeared in Mamfe, or tortured in dungeons across Yaoundé. Well, this civil disobedience has over time become one of the most unified acts across the Federal Republic of Amazonia. Despite internal divisions, the Monday Ghost Town has remained largely respected, showing the power of shared suffering and a collective dream. Now, the violent scenes of July 7th point to a deeper issue, the colonial government's fear of non-violent resistance. The louder the silence grows in Amazonian towns on Mondays, the more brutal the repression becomes. Rather than acknowledge the legitimate grievances of the people, La République continues to respond with force. The use of live ammunitions, intimidation, and mass arrest on days like these only deepen the rift between the two nations and strengthen Amazonia's resolve to break away. One might ask, if a people's silence frightens a government more than their protest, then what does that say about the legitimacy of that government's claim to authority? Despite the uncertainty and danger, Monday Ghost Towns endure because they remind the world that Amazonians have not forgotten. They have not forgotten October 1st. They have not forgotten the students killed in Kubo, the women shot in Ekona, or the journalists jailed in Boya. And until justice is done, they will not go quietly into the shadows. The international community may hope for peace, but for Amazonia, peace without justice is just another word for surrender. As Bamenda reels from yet another bloody Monday, one thing is clear. The Ghost Town is not merely an act of defiance. It is a symbol of survival and a people who refuse to be erased. Now we have in the studio with us to analyze today's discussion Barrister Mbeseha. Good evening, Barrister. Yes, just before we get your input about this particular reports in Bamenda about yesterday, still in Bamenda, Barrister Mbeseha, Amazonia on the Ghost Town morning of July 7th, same day, still in Bamenda, the streets of Bamenda bore witness to the grim and familiar tactics of colonial violence. 4 Amazonian civilians accused without trial of being restoration fighters, that is the Amazonian State Army, were summarily executed by forces loyal to La République du Cameroun at the Ntassen Bridge in Nkwen. Now, among the slain was a woman whose identity remains unknown, but whose death is now added to the long and growing list of lives cut short in the ongoing war of liberation. Now, very sad and only shows some more reasons for Amazonians to respect the Monday Ghost Towns, to stay indoors, knowing that they're constantly targets of the lawless colonial forces of occupation. The killings came just hours after a violent attack at Dreamland Cabaret, a known civilian space in Bamenda, where several patrons sustained gunshot injuries. The scene was chaotic and harrowing. Videos circulating across social media showed victims being rushed to hospitals, bleeding from gun wounds. while eyewitnesses recounted a terrifying assault by unidentified gunmen. Yet no group officially claimed responsibility for the Cabaret attack. Even more suspiciously, many survivors expressed doubt that the Amazonian State Army were involved at all, suggesting instead that these could be false flag operations, cowardly acts carried out by regime-backed militias or rogue elements disguised to tarnish the Amazonian liberation movement, especially with the fact that they were shot at while being accused of being part of the Amazonian State Army. But then without investigation, without evidence, and without hesitation, the colonial military pounced. By sunrise, they had executed 4 people at Undaunted Bridge, branding them separatist fighters and justifying the deaths of these 4 civilians as retaliatory justice for the attack at Dreamland, with no forensic inquiry, no judicial process, no press briefing, just bodies left by the roadside and silence from the colonial authorities. And this, sadly, is not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of the systematic violence that defines La Republic's military occupation of Amazonia. Now, under the guise of counterinsurgency, colonial forces have adopted a doctrine where every young man is a suspect, every gathering is a threat, and every civilian's death just another unspoken statistics. The killing of accused Amazonians without trial, without identification, and without accountability only reveals a deeper rot. The normalization of extrajudicial executions as state policy time and again, the colonial regime hides behind terrorism labels to excuse its war crimes, dismissing slain civilians as separatists and absolving itself of any moral or legal responsibility. Now, what remains consistent is the absence of due process. In Amazonia, one doesn't need to be caught with arms to be killed. One simply needs to be at the wrong place at the wrong hour, with the wrong accent, or in the wrong skin. While the victims of the Undaunted Bridge execution have not been officially linked to the Cabaret shooting, that has not stopped the regime's military from acting as judge, jury, and executioner. And even more telling is the silence from the colonial administration. No formal statement, no inquiry, no proof, just the same worn-out narrative. They were Amazonian fighters. But even if they were combatants, a claim not supported by any independent findings, does the right to life and trial not apply? Or does colonial law only apply when it suits the occupier's agenda? Well, the answer to that seems clear already. In a conflict where the colonial regime paints resistance as rebellion and self-determination as criminality, the killing of unarmed civilians becomes not just common, but politically convenient. And we wonder, how long will the world watch silently as a colonial state wields death as its only language of control? Well, for Amazonians, these murders are not just personal. They are political. They remind the people of what they already know too well, that their safety, dignity, and humanity are expendable under colonial rule. Each unjust killing deepens the call for independence, not out of vengeance, but from the clarity and coexistence. Coexistence has failed until Amazonia can speak with its own voice and govern under its own flag. Such atrocities will continue because the colonial system cannot give justice to the colonized. The execution at Undaunted Bridge will be remembered, not just as a moment of loss, but sadly as a testament to the urgency of liberation. Barrister Mbeseha, to tackle this reports about the Monday ghost town, we're seeing the adverse effect, and we're seeing civilians being caught at a crosshair, not knowing if to respect it or not, as both of them seem to have a fatal consequence, one by the colonial state army and two against the detrimental to the entire struggle for liberation. What would you say about this report, Barrister Mbeseha?
I have not seen them in Douala and Yaoundé for some shooting people to kill. If you follow them all the time, they say, well, we've caught them, we'll neutralize them, we're going to reconstitute the scene. They don't kill them. So why are they killing these people or somewhere in Amazonia, just killing them? Who knows who they are? Where would they live to tell their own story? Where the accusations they levied against them were correct or false? And so they are doing this as the whole goal is to eliminate any resistance, anything called resistance. Otherwise, how do they explain? Ghost town, if you see the pictures of the ghost town, the streets are deserted. What are you doing with arms trying to enforce a ghost town? To enforce a deserted street. There are no people in the streets moving with arms. And so you send armed people to supervise a ghost town with live ammunition. What is that all for? People are sleeping in their houses. They refuse to come out. They refuse to go to work. And then, of course, your response is to come with arms. Shoot them to kill them. For a simple reason that they are Amazonians. They are vowed forever. At the end of this thing, there will be no Amazonian who will survive to tell the story. These guys are the story. He said among the killer, among the victims, was a woman. Well, was this woman an Amazonian fighter? And there's this general blanket of Amazonian fighters, not the ASAs. It's not everybody who carries a gun who is an Amazonian fighter. We have said it many times before, it has been confirmed even by Yaoundé. Lots of those who carry the arms are agents of Yaoundé. They're agents of the administration. And that's perhaps why they just keep quiet. They're not going to say anything. If I told they say anything, it will be the investigations are continuing. If I told they say anything, it will be unarmed, unidentifiable criminals. That's all. But strange enough, in this particular case, they have said nothing. No statement from the security authorities in Bamenda, no statement from the administration. The governor was supposed to be the chef there. And so, to Amazonians, if this goes down, we've said it many times before, stay home. Stay home. Because there are consequences, some directly and some indirectly. And so again, this is part of the killing. It is a long story that has been happening forever and ever. They kill us to eliminate our younger generation so that they might never live to fight back. And so that's it. Ambassadors have to be careful. If they are stayed home, I'm sure probably they would have killed them, but they would have come knocking their doors. Therefore, what were you doing there? If you were Amazonians. If you were Amazonians, you were certainly not the ASAs. You were people recruited to serve the purpose of the colonizer. What do you?
Barrister Mbeseha, that is well said. This is a sad story, but if anything, I believe Amazonians are learning more reasons why to respect the Monday Ghost Downs, because it not only defies the sole aim of the Monday Ghost Downs, why they were created, it also gives La Republique an excuse to arbitrarily execute Amazonians in the guise of terminating a so-called separatist. So it only gives reasons to why Amazonians should stay clear of public spaces on Mondays. But then still in Bamenda, something interesting has also happened. We see the Minister of Secondary Education in La République du Cameroon, Professor Nalova Lyonga. She has taken an unusually critical stance against her own government, condemning the deplorable state of infrastructure in Bamenda. Her remarks made in front of the Colonial Prime Minister and other top officials at the Congress Hall in Bamenda painted a grim picture of neglect, abandonment, and frustration. Lyonga did not mind and mince her words as she described the city's deteriorating roads as a glaring example of government failure. She urged La Republique authorities to end the cycle of empty promises and take real, measurable actions to address the chronic infrastructural decay plaguing the city. Her tone conveyed not only disappointment, but a rare public demand for accountability from within the ranks of the regime. The city of Bamenda, once a thriving economic and cultural hub in the heart of the northern of Amazonia, has suffered years of neglect. Its roads are now marked by deep potholes, impassable stretches, and hazardous detours, all worsened by the ongoing armed conflict between colonial forces and the Amazonian State Army. Now, the impact has been profound. Daily life disrupted, economic activities stalled, and access to health, education, and emergency services are very severely hindered. Now, residents wary of decades of marginalization and unfulfilled promises welcome Lyonga's honesty, but many remain skeptical about whether her words will spark real change. With the city teetering under the weight of poor governance and violent militarization, the question remains whether these grievances will result in policy shifts or simply fade into yet another cycle of political theater. While Lyonga's bold criticism may seem refreshing, it actually raises a deeper contradiction at the heart of the colonial administration. For years, Amazonian voices have decried this very same abandonment, the systematic neglect, the infrastructural decay, and the state selective development agenda when it comes to the southern Cameroons. Now, these cries were dismissed as rebellion, sedition, or separatist noise. Now, from within the colonial structure itself, one of its own ministers echoes the same concern. The same concerns long dismissed as anti-state propaganda. Now, we wonder how ironic is it that the very voices once branded as enemies of the state are now being echoed by the state's own mouthpieces, only after the damage has become too visible to deny. Well, Lyonga's statement, whether genuine or strategic, only affirms what Amazonians have long asserted, that Bamenda and the entire former British Southern Cameroons has been systematically abandoned, not just in infrastructure, but in dignity, development, and recognition. The colonial regime cannot continue to ignore people's cry for justice while pretending to speak in their interests. As the people of Bamenda wait once more for promises to become actions, many have already turned their hopes towards self-determination where development is not a favor, but a right. Barrister Mbeseha, we've long talked about the deplorable state of the road, but it's bringing a twist when we see the likes of Nalova, Lyonga talking about it. What would you think? Is this another political theater going on here, or would you say it's a real concern for her to speak about it?
No, it can never be a real concern. Never a real concern. It's a political theater on the other hand. See, because what you hear Nalova saying there's more than she said about the roads. In addition to saying that the roads were bad, she said this was my first time of coming to Bamenda. That's her first time coming to Bamenda. Remember this. Who is Nalova? She is the Minister of Secondary Education. When did she get office? 2019, 7 years ago. And they have been talking about the Amazonian War. Call it anything they call from Yaoundé. The people are most affected by that war include secondary schools, hundreds of which are found in the northwest, they call it. Then what they call the northwest, which includes Bamenda. In Aluva, earlier, at the peak of the thing, the teachers were afraid. It was unsafe for teachers to go to school. She sat in Yaoundé and said, every teacher who feels unsafe, she asked for transfer and leave. Talking to the teachers in the northwest and southwest. She is the Minister of Secondary Education. For 7 years, she has not put foot there. For 7 years, she has not felt the pain of what her teachers, her pupils, everybody connected to secondary education has been feeling. You cannot call that a theater now. It is masquerading. Of course, that's the truth. But that's what people have been living under for the past several years, for the past 60 years. That's what Bamenda has been. She's a government minister. She is an elite by every standard. She's an educated person. But she's not the only government minister, and most particularly, she's not the government minister from the so-called Northwest. Shortly after she said that, less than 48 hours after, as late as yesterday, just Monday, what did you see in Yaoundé? We saw the very government ministers in Yaoundé from the Northwest streaming into the palace. To do what? To tell the world that President Pobia is the best they ever had. They did not say that the roads were bad as Nalova was saying. They did not complain about anything wrong in their so-called regional headquarters. Absolutely nothing. I'm sure they included the government delegate, whose roads you are finding there and down there. Yes. And so it is masquerading. That's the very time where she didn't come there alone. She came with the prime minister. Do you need to tell somebody? The prime minister was driving on the road, on that very road, and telling people what? Oh, heaven is here. We've done reconstruction. And so which voice is stronger? The voice of the or the voice of the minister? Which voice is stronger? The voice of the presidency or the voice of the poor Nalova? So it is a masquerade. And so until our people learn to tell the truth to themselves, Nalova didn't come back, who comes from somewhere in Momo, where basically can never even go to her village. She's a minister in Yaoundé there. Not just a minister, but a minister at the presidency. Do you really need Nalova to come and tell her that there's no road in Bamenda? Do you need Nalova to tell Gentro, somebody who is minister of mines? Do you need her? No. These people are liars. They are accomplices to their own suffering. No, they are accomplices to their own suffering. How many of them live in Bamenda? They come there in armored cars or come in helicopters. That is Bamenda. There's a town from where Madame Mundi was adopted. She was living in Bamenda. She lives in Bamenda. Who is she? She's a senator. Oh, she was a cultural advisor. Does she drive on those roads? Of course. That's where she drove her Prado, where the people picked her. And so again, this is political machination. They went to Bamenda not to do anything. They went to Bamenda to start a campaign. And that to give an excuse. You say the roads are bad, so that the Prime Minister will say, yeah, we're taking care of it. And what did the Prime Minister say? He stood there and said, well, we've just finished the road going to Munda. It's almost done. We've got to Bambili, the road is almost done. And 24 hours after that, they trooped to the presidency in Yaoundé. Oh, President Paul Biya is the best. Oh, the CPDM is the best we've ever found. Vote for him for the next 7 years. I'm sure when did you vote for him? After 7 years. Nalova will come back there and still find the roads worse than what she said she found in 2025. And so it is political machination. It is political stupidity. Because you don't need to tell anybody that. You didn't need to go there to know the roads are bad. How many accidents have occurred in Bamenda? How many reports do they have from Bamenda, from the governor, from the government delegate, whatever thing they call it there? They know those things. So putting that thing that, well, this is the best, the worst I've seen, was simply to lay the foundation for what the prime minister had come to do. To tell people normalcy is returning, to tell people who have taken money from the Islamic Bank to fix this very road, which Nalova was saying doesn't exist. To do what? To open a football stadium with 345 seats, which is not even up to a hall in the high school here. And so it's a political campaign. It's the same thing. When Nalova goes back to Boya, if she does go, she will probably visit the University of Boya as a minister, and she will clap for the faculty of school drivers, driving schools, open the University of Boya, and so on and so forth. So these are all political criminals. These are jokers that we should take them never seriously. They are naked jokers. And so she is not different from Gentro. She is not different from any other politician. She was just, these things are teleguided to tell the truth, to shift responsibility. Otherwise, the government is supposed to be collegial. She's supposed to support her colleague in the Ministry of Transport. The transport is supposed to support her Ministry of Education, and so on and so forth. So it's not a dispersed government that everybody does or says what he or she likes. That's political machination. I hope the people in Bamenda, I hope Ambazonians understand those facts very easily and clearly. Over to you.
This is why a lot of Ambazonians believe it is quite hypocritical for her to make such a decry. But then, thank you, Barrister Mbeseha. This is where we'll have to call it a close for the Homefront report. It's been amazing, as always, having your contributions and your input on Homefront concerns. But for now, we have to go on to the African news. Well, on the African scene, we see Conakry. A year has passed since Omar Sila and Mamadou Biloba, two members of the civil society coalition Front National de Defense de la Constitution, which is the FNDC, were forcibly disappeared in Guinea. Their fate remains unknown. The silence surrounding their whereabouts reflects a growing pattern of enforced disappearances and repression that continues to shape political life in Guinea and mirrors troubling trends across several African states. Now, the FNDC, once a vocal civic movement advocating for a constitutional order and a return to civilian rule, was officially dissolved by Guinea's military authorities in 2022. Now, despite its bans, some of its leaders continued to mobilize public demonstrations, including one planned for July 11th, 2024, aimed at protesting media repression and authoritarian overreach. Just days before that protest, on July 9th, National Coordinator Omar Sila and his colleague Mamadou Bilouba were abducted. The disappearance has since drawn alarm from right groups and international observers. Authorities have consistently denied holding the two men, and there has been no formal update on their case. Human rights organization Amnesty International has raised concerns that such victims of abduction have been subjected to torture and inhumane treatment. Guinea's chief prosecutor had announced the opening of an investigation into several cases of disappearances, but 1 year later, no findings have been released to the public. The case of Abdul Sako, another prominent activist who was abducted more recently, has reignited fears. In response, Guinea's Bar Association issued a strong statement condemning what it described as a climate of terror taking root, coupled with an alarming silence from the judiciary. Now, this is not the first time Guinea has witnessed crackdowns on dissent. The country has a long and complex political history marked by transitions between military and civilian rule, often accompanied by unrest, repression, and contested legitimacy. And forced disappearances where individuals are secretly abducted or imprisoned by the state or its agent with no acknowledgement of their fate have long been a tactic used to eliminate opposition, silence protest, and create fear. Sadly, Guinea's current trajectory echoes a broader pattern seen across several African nations, where dissenting voices, be they journalists, lawyers, civil society leaders, or political activists, face arbitrary arrest, intimidation, or worse, in such environments, criticism of government policies, calls for accountability, or demands for democratic processes are often treated as threats to national stability rather than as legitimate expressions of civil engagement. Now, while every country's situation is unique, the suppression of civil liberties is in response to activism, particularly in transitional governments or military-led regimes, often leads to increased instability rather than the calm or control that such actions aim to produce. Where citizens cannot freely express grievances or advocate for reform, trust in public institutions erodes and polarization deepens, as well as radicalism taking root. Now, the long silence surrounding Sila and Ba's fate speaks volume about the state of justice in Guinea. Despite public declarations of investigations, the lack of transparency and accountability signals a troubling erosion of the rule of law. When institutions meant to protect citizens, like the judiciary, remain silent or complicit in the face of such human rights violations, the space for lawful redress narrows dangerously. Moreover, the persistent repression of dissent undermines public confidence in democratic processes. Guinea, like many countries navigating fragile transitions, faces a critical choice: continue down a path where civic participation is criminalized, or allow for open dialogue, legal reforms, and inclusive governance. While the international community has in the past called for greater respect for human rights in Guinea, particularly following coups protests, and contested elections. But the fate of Sila Ba and others remain a reminder that without internal reform and consistent external pressure, calls for justice may fall on deaf ears. Now, as Guinea's military authorities continue to resist setting a clear timeline for elections and a return to civilian rule, the cost of silence only grows heavier. Every unacknowledged disappearance chips away at the nation's democratic potential and fellow citizens waiting for answers that may never come. Well, still on the African scene, we see something sad happening in Cairo. A massive fire broke out on Monday at a key telecom Egypt facility in downtown Cairo. Now, leaving at least 14 people injured and causing temporary blackouts in internet and mobile phone services across parts of the city. According to the health ministry, the injured were transported to nearby hospitals for treatment. Amongst them, 2 emergency responders suffered burns to their hands, a witness told local media outlet Cairo 24. The blaze reportedly began on the 7th floor of a prominent 10-story building belonging to Telecom Egypt, situated in the bustling Ramses district. The governor's office confirmed the location and stated that the fire ignited in one of the building equipment. It was in the room of the building equipment. Now, a thick black smoke billowed into the sky. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Firefighters used ladders to battle the flames, while ambulances stood by the security personnel cordoned off the area to manage the growing crowd and ensure safety. The Telecommunication Regulatory Authority stated that the fire caused a temporary disruption in communication services, with several areas experiencing mobile and internet outages. Now, online transaction and digital payment platforms were also affected, while authorities assured the public the services would be restored within hours. The interruption highlighted vulnerabilities in the country's digital infrastructure. Network data from NetBlocks and International Internet Monitoring Group showed that Egypt's national connectivity dropped to 62% of normal levels at the height of the fire, corroborating widespread reports of disrupted services linked to the damaged telecoms data center. Well, the incident occurred just a few kilometers from the site of a tragic 2019 fire at a Cairo train station, which claimed at least 25 lives and left dozens more injured after a crash triggered a deadly explosion. The proximity of both events underscores a lingering concern about urban safety measures and infrastructure oversight in high traffic areas of the capital. Well, how many more close calls will it take before essential infrastructure is treated not just as a utility, but as a lifeline requiring urgent protection and investment? Well, as of late Monday, the fire had been brought under control and restoration efforts were underway, and an investigation has been launched to determine the cause of the blaze. Well, still on the African scene, we see Ghana has launched its first national anti-gold smuggling task force as part of a sweeping initiative to recover billions of dollars lost through illicit gold trading. The move, announced by President John Dramani Mahama on Tuesday, aims to crack down on illegal gold exports and strengthen the country's revenue base. The new task force, backed by both military and police forces, comes in response to years of unsuccessful efforts to regulate the country's artisanal mining sector. Now, previous initiatives failed to curb illegal extraction and revenue leakage, a problem that continues to plague several African gold-producing nations. Now, to boost public participation in the initiative, informants who provide credible intelligence are said to receive 10% of the value of gold seized from smugglers, Mahama said at the task force inauguration. The task force's formation follows the establishment of Ghana's centralized gold trading platform, Gold Board, earlier this year. According to Mahama, the board has already contributed to record official exports, 55.7 metric tons valued at $5 billion in the first 5 months of 2025. And it says this is money that would not have returned to Ghana as traders would have held the foreign exchange abroad, he noted. Now, looking ahead, Ghana plans to implement a nationwide gold traceability system and shift to refine gold exports by 2026. The country also intends to enhance local beneficiation through an international organization for standardization certified assay laboratory and a dedicated gold manufacturing hub. The reforms are part of broader efforts across West Africa to maximize gains from rising commodity prices, while military-led governments in the region are resorting to asset seizures and contract renegotiations. Democratic states like Ghana and Ivory Coast are pursuing more stable reforms, including higher royalties and improved revenue sharing frameworks. The global gold prices have surged 25% year to date, peaking at $3,500 per ounce in April, further underscoring the urgency of curbing smuggling and retaining value within producer nations. Well, with that, we'll head on to the news across the globe. Well, on the foreign scene, Roman Starovoit, Russia's recently dismissed transport minister, was found dead from a gunshot wound in his car near Moscow just hours after President Vladimir Putin removed him from office. Authorities suspect suicide, though investigations are ongoing to determine the exact circumstances. Now, Starovoit, who's 53, was in the ministerial post for less than a year. Previously, he served as governor of the Kursk region, which borders Ukraine. His abrupt dismissal, confirmed via a presidential decree without explanation, raised questions about possible links to a major corruption investigation tied to that region. The corruption probe focuses on the alleged mismanagement of 19.4 billion rubles, that's 246 million US dollars, and allocated in 2022 to strengthen Russia's border with Ukraine. Now, there are ongoing concerns that some of those funds may have been embezzled, undermining the region's defense capacity during a period when Ukrainian forces temporarily seized parts of Kursk. Though authorities have not established a definitive connection between Starovoit and the embezzlement case, reports indicate that his name surfaced during inquiries into the conduct of his successor, Alexei Smirnov, who was charged earlier this year. Russian media reported claims that Smirnov implicated Starovoit in the scandal, though these allegations remain unconfirmed. But then the investigative committee of Russia stated it was examining the cause and context of the minister's death. Local media said a pistol registered to Starovoit was found near his body. Discovered in bushes close to his parked Tesla near his residence, Starovoit's tenure as transport minister began in May 2024, only 3 months into his role. Ukraine launched the largest cross-border incursion into Russian territory since World War II. Now, the Kursk region, where he once governed, became a central battleground. The broader context highlights challenges facing Russia's transport sector. The country's aviation industry suffers from spare parts shortages, while Russian Railways faces a ballooning interest cost and amid elevation wartime inflation. But then long-range Ukrainian drone strikes continue to disrupt airport operations across Russia. Now, in the wake of Starovoit's death, Andrei Nikitin, former governor of the Novgorod region, was swiftly named acting transport minister. The Kremlin published images of him meeting President Putin, underscoring the urgency of stabilizing the ministry. Nikitin pledged to prioritize the digitalization of transport system to ease cargo congestion and enhance cross-border logistics. Now, whether his appointment will restore confidence in the ministry, now shadowed by scandal and tragedy, it remains to be seen. But then that is all we have on the foreign news for today. Before we go, let's take a look at the recap. On the news of Undaunted tonight, we saw another arbitrary killing of Ambazonians by colonial forces, as well as a blood on Monday, where Bamenda still observes the ghost town, as well as La Republic minister slamming colonial government over Bamenda's abandoned state as roads raise concern, looking at it from a hypocritical angle, and then Guinea's climate of fear. A year on enforced disappearances continue to silence dissent. That's what we saw on the African scene. On the foreign scene, Russia dismisses transport minister found dead amid corruption probes. And that was it for tonight's Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. On behalf of the entire Undaunted, we say thank you for tuning in. We'll leave you with ABC Amba TV images. Good night and God bless you.